Alright, so the January transfer window slammed shut last week, and I wanted to go through all 20 Premier League clubs, go through their business and give them a grade just like we used to get in school for classes. None of these numbers and anything like that, just the good old grading system. Anywhere from A+ if you had a really good transfer window, all the way down to F if you've just downright failed and had an absolute nightmare. So I'm going to go through all Premier League clubs in alphabetical order. Thanks for joining us on the Supercut. I will also, of course, release these individually as well. So let's dive in, guys. Let's go through all of the business for all 20 Premier League clubs in the January transfer window. So we're going to start with Arsenal. Arsenal did absolutely no business in this window just gone. They didn't lose any players. They didn't bring any players in, whether that was a permanent transfer or on loan. Well, there was technically one deal for Arsenal during this window, and that was Aidan Heaven, who was gone to Manchester United, but he never made an appearance for Arsenal at senior level, so he's not someone who's really going to be missed. He could well have been somebody who could have succeeded at Arsenal in the future, maybe someone who succeeds at Manchester United. Yeah, I mean, in terms of significant business, Arsenal were extremely quiet during this transfer window. And Arsenal's window overall, I would have to say, is a disappointment. Yes, they didn't lose anybody. Yes, they have a very strong squad, but the fact remains is that a lot of people are saying, and without, not without credence at the end of the day, that Arsenal really should have signed a striker. They were linked with the likes of Alexander Isak. They were even linked with a midfielder, I believe, from Real Sociedad, as someone just to help kind of bolster the ranks at Arsenal, and they ended up getting nobody. There was absolutely no business whatsoever at the Emirates, and questions really have to be asked. The role of Edu, the former recruitment guy over at Arsenal, now he has gone to Nottingham Forest. Has that role been filled successfully? I mean, I would argue, looking at this, probably not, because they did absolutely nothing. You would expect them to get something just to help them in the Champions League, help them, challenge for that league title with Liverpool at the top of the league. But as it is, Arsenal doing absolutely nothing, which I'm sure in a sense is not the worst thing, but it has to go down as a disappointment. So for me, Arsenal get a D grade overall for their business in winter 2025. Aston Villa had a very eventful transfer window just gone. Now, if you've already seen my winners and losers video for the Premier League clubs in terms of who had a good transfer window and who had a bad transfer window, Aston Villa are firmly on the good side. I put them as a winner, and I'd say really they had arguably the best transfer window out of any Premier League club. They offloaded a lot of talent, quite a few players going out on loan. The highlight of these being Emiliano Buendia, who has gone on loan to Bayer Leverkusen, and I believe there is a option to make that deal a permanent one if the Bundesliga club so desires. The biggest loss for them is John Duran, and the question was, how are they going to fill that void? Now, in terms of Duran's deal to go to Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia, it starts at £65 million, and there are reports that depending on how Duran does over in Saudi, that could rise to around £80 million, if not even more. So in my opinion, even though Duran is a very promising young player, comes off the bench, makes an impact, he will always be within Villa for that goal against Bayern Munich in the Champions League. I think it's an excellent deal. I really, really do. £65 million for him is not a bad deal at all. And they're not selling it to a divisional or even a European rival either. He's firmly in a different continent over in Saudi Arabia. Diego Carlos as well, he was sold to Fenerbahce for £9 million. Given how much he was playing, that's a solid deal in my opinion. And Jaden Philogene as well, he was the target of Ipswich Town in the summer, but he did end up going to Ipswich Town this window for £20.5 million. Again, that's a good deal in my opinion. I think that's a fair price for him. For the exact same price, Aston Villa have brought in Donyell Malen from Borussia Dortmund as well. I think that's an upgrade. I really do. Philogene might have more potential, but in terms of the present, in terms of right now, Malen is a better player, and I think that's a fantastic deal. And Andres Garcia has come in from Levante. Again, that's just another option. Squad rotation player, £6 million, cheap and cheerful by Premier League standards. Marco Asensio, that was a real coup and just came out of nowhere, really. He's come on loan from PSG. Axel Disasi as well. Again, another squad player, defensive player, someone to short Villa up at the back. I think that's an excellent option for them. He's come on loan from Chelsea. Marcus Rashford from Manchester United on loan. Now, this is a big risk in my opinion because Marcus Rashford has not performed at all for Manchester United this season, or in truth, even last season as well. He was quite poor on the whole. But he could really resurrect his career down at Villa, and it's a relative no risk for them because I know they're covering his wages, which are a lot of money, but hey, if he's rubbish, he'll just go back to Old Trafford at the end of the season. So it's worth a go. He's someone who has experience of even playing in the Champions League, I believe. I'm sure he's played in the Champions League for Man United when they used to be in that competition. It's not been that long. I know it feels like it probably for Man United fans, but you know, overall, honestly, an excellent window for Aston Villa. They have they've exited the window. They've completed the window with a much better squad than what they started with it, and they've actually got more money in the bank as well. So for me, this has to go down as an A. I would put it as an A+ or an A start, but the question marks remain over Rashford. How good will he do? And I'm very much on the fence as to whether he will do well. I think he'll do all right, but it's far too early to say, and there is of course some risk there with that one. So moving on to the next. Bournemouth are up next, and I think the main thing for Bournemouth is that they've not really lost any significant players during this window. Philip Billing has gone on loan to Nap. Mark Travers has also gone on loan to Middlesbrough in the Championship, and Max Aarons has gone on loan to Valencia, but none of those guys are really playing that much. That's not a big loss. They've not lost anybody on a permanent either. The likes of Kirkez and Huijsen, big targets for some massive clubs during this window, but nothing ended up happening. So the fact that Bournemouth have kept their big hitters who have been excellent for them this season, they've been fantastic. Honestly, they've been incredible. They've been one of the surprise packages of the season this season, Bournemouth. Aside from Nottingham Forest, of course, I think Bournemouth are one of the standout performers in the Premier League this season. They play some excellent stuff. In terms of them bringing some players in, they've brought in some players just really to shore up their ranks, really, just some more depth, maybe in preparation for a European campaign next season. You never know. They definitely have a chance of that for sure, even an outside shot of the Champions League, of course, which, who would have guessed that? Who would have guessed that? I definitely wouldn't have done. Julio Soler has come in from Lanús. He's a defender. He's coming for £6.8 million. I believe that's from Argentina. Matai Akinboni has come in from DC United in the United States. Again, 1.7 million, relatively cheap and cheerful. It's an undisclosed fee for Ellie Junior Krupi as well, but I imagine it probably wasn't too much from Lorient, who I believe in the Ligue 2 over in France, the second division. He's actually not joining the club though at the moment. He is going back on loan to his former club, Lorient, for the end of the season. He will join up with the squad in summer 2025. So how do I rate Bournemouth's transfer window? For me, honestly, the fact they've kept all the top players, the fact that they've brought a couple players in here and there, I'd say that's above average. So I would give Bournemouth a B, to be honest with you. I think the Cherries have had a very sweet transfer window. Yes, I use that one every time I get the chance. They've not made any big signings, but at the end of the day, because of PSR and stuff, you don't want to spend too much. And I feel like Bournemouth, they've made quite a few big signings in the summer as well. So honestly, fantastic for them. They've strengthened and they've not weakened at all in any areas, really, for me. So yeah, good window for Bournemouth. But can they get that European campaign next season? Honestly, I think they definitely will. It was anything but busy bees for Brentford during this window. Not a lot going on really from the West London club when it came to business during this winter transfer window. Just 3 deals in total. Mads Roerslev went on loan to Wolfsburg over in the Bundesliga, and Tristan Kramer went on an undisclosed fee to Millwall. Not really any big losses there really when it comes to that. Michael Koyadi has come in on loan from Fiorentina. He is a defensive player. I mean, for me, Brentford really, it's borderline between a D and a C for me in terms of their transfer window. But let's be honest here, guys, they don't have the biggest budget. They are probably down there with Bournemouth in terms of the size of the club overall. I've got nothing against either club. Brentford, I went to Griffin Park, wonderful stadium, very rustic, very old-fashioned. I've not been to the G-Tech yet, but it looks like a very tidy, modern stadium. So, you know, they really do have lofty ambitions at Brentford, but they also have to be realistic too. You know, they didn't lose anybody significant. That's the thing. No, Mbuemo has stayed. Wissa has stayed. A lot of their big hitters have stayed, and I feel like that is probably the most important thing for Brentford, not losing their key players. So for me, I would have to give them a C. It's been average. They've not lost any big hitters. They haven't really brought anybody in who's going to change the team that much. I mean, Coyote do all right for Brentford, but I don't see him really being a world beater there, to be honest. And it's literally just him that's coming as well. So for me, not not so busy bees, but at the end of the day, they're going to keep buzzing, and they are going to be staying in the Premier League this season. They've had a bit of a slip recently. The home form has not been quite as impervious as it was before, of course, but at the end of the day, they're doing all right. Being in the Premier League for Brentford is huge. I think before their current stint, they hadn't been in the Premier League since the 40s. Brentford fans do correct me on that, of course, but I know it was a very long time. Not in my lifetime anyway, were Brentford ever in the Premier League before their current stint. So yeah, all right window, it'll see them through. They'll be fine. Their biggest thing, they'll be keeping the manager in the summer. They need to keep Thomas Frank, and they've done that too. So let's move on to the next one. So Brighton and Hove Albion, they actually spent a decent amount of money during this transfer window. They spent massively in the summer, of course, but they've kind of doubled down on that by bringing in some pretty significant players during this transfer window. Diego Gomez and Aaron Cashin both arrived for around £10 million each from Inter Miami and Derby County, respectively. Stefano Simas will go back on loan to Nuremberg for the remainder of the season, but he has joined Brighton for around £20 million. So a lot of money spent by Brighton, in fairness. On the outs, Evan Ferguson is probably the biggest one. He's gone on loan to West Ham United for the rest of the season. Someone who, annoyingly for him, is, he's really struggled with injuries recently. I think he can get back to his best. He was a very much a talked about striker, potentially going to a super club for £100 million, as Brighton love doing. Brighton love sending out a player for that amount of money to another club. But it's significantly for them, they've not lost any big players really. Moda's gone to Feyenoord for just over £1 million, and Seiko and Barco gone on loan as well to Ipswich and Strasbourg, but they've not lost anybody significant really, in my opinion. Matoma's stayed. There's been a bunch of other players that have been linked with some massive moves, but the thing is, Brighton have kept them, their squad, their core group of players really, and they've added to it. So for me, it's been another good window for Brighton. On the pitch, it's a bit mixed bag really. They're not doing the worst, they're not doing the best. They're advanced in the FA Cup, which is great for them, of course, to beat Chelsea the other day. But for me, honestly, Brighton have done a good job this transfer window. So for me, they have to get at least a B grade overall for their business. So Chelsea, you could never predict Chelsea Football Club when it comes to transfers. It's just an impossible task. You never know what they're going to do. They're either going to do absolutely crazy stuff or absolutely nothing. This kind of falls into the nothing category. But in terms of ins anyway for them, they only brought one player in during the winter transfer window, and that was Matisse Amugu, who was joined from Saint Etienne for around £12.5 million. He's a central midfielder. He's the only person who has come in on a permanent deal for them. But on the outs, they were so busy at loaning out players. They did make one sale. They did sell Cesare Casedi to Torino for £12.5 million, the exact same amount that they paid for the player that I just mentioned before. But in terms of actually getting rid of players on loan, this was so many. They just couldn't get rid of them fast enough. Renato Vega, Ben Chilwell, Carney Jamaica, Caleb Wiley, Axel Disasi, João Felix, all going out on loan during this window to various clubs around England and Europe as well. For me, it seems as though Chelsea are trying to stay on the good side of PSR and FFP, really. That's my kind of take with that, just trying to generate some revenue without actually losing their assets. I mean, the likes of João Felix joined for like £40 million in the summer, and now he's being loaned out to AC Milan in Italy, which is a good thing for him. I'm sure he'll do well there, but, from Chelsea's point of view, it's not great. They've lost some of the depth that they had, but if anybody has, I mean, they had the Mariana Trench worth of depth when it came to players before. They had no issue in terms of fielding 2 full starting 11s and another one to boot just in case people get injured. So, I wouldn't say it's been a good window for Chelsea because they've exited it weaker than when they entered it. But in terms of the weakness that they've, kind of endured from that, the negatives when it comes to the players that they've lost, they've not really lost that many players that are going to make a big difference. I mean, yeah, João Felix is a good player, but he wasn't really doing much at Chelsea. Ben Chilwell was injured all the time. Vega played every now and again, but it was rare. Chukwuemeka even rarer. Disase even rarer. So for me, honestly, I'm gonna sit on the fence. I'm gonna give Chelsea a C for their transfer window business. Just just because it doesn't really mean anything. They've not strengthened, which will be disappointing to them, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, realistically, could they? Could they really have strengthened the squad? They would have had to spend 50, 60 million pounds on any kind of player they want to bring in. And the gains that they would have got for that would have been extremely marginal, particularly in the short term as well. They've made a real habit of signing young and promising players. They're not going to sign like a 28-year-old who is at the peak of his powers. So for me, I'm just going to give it a C, because they've at least offloaded some players in terms of the squad depth. That should help the harmony of this team, but they're not in the best of form right now, Chelsea. So I'd be a little worried if I was a Chelsea fan at the moment, but we'll see how they get on in the second half of the season. It was a fantastic start to the season to them, but for them, let's see how they get on in the Conference League in particular. That is realistically now their only hope of a trophy, because of course they are out of the FA Cup after this weekend. Like a lot of teams in this this kind of rundown of the January transfer business, the winter transfer business, I should say, because of stretching to February just about. You know, Palace's kind of transfer window is really defined by the players they didn't lose, the business that they didn't have to do. Mark Gahey, I believe, was the subject of, what was an £80 million bid from Newcastle? I think it was Newcastle. I know they've been in from the past. So the main thing is for Palace that they didn't lose their main players. They did not lose their big guys. They've not lost the likes of Gahey or Eze or anybody like that. You know, they are still firing on all cylinders in terms of their squad, really. On the ins, they have signed Romain Esse from Millwall for £12 million, which seemed a bit steep, but didn't he score on his debut with his first touch against Brentford? I mean, they still lost, unfortunately, for them, Crystal Palace, but yeah, an incredible debut for him. Yet another young talent that Palace have poached from another London side, and it looks as though early days, this kid could be promising. Chilwell is also a decent signing on loan from Chelsea as well, I think, to be honest with you. I mean, again, someone who's not really fit that often, but maybe a bit of a change of scenery might help him out, you know. He's definitely someone who could come in and make a difference at Palace. He's definitely someone at least on their level, if not even above. But again, the fitness thing is an issue there. That's all they did in terms of the ins. On the outs, they've loaned out Rob Holding to Sheffield United in the Champions League. I can dream. The Championship. Champions League in 3 years, lads. Come on. Let's be realistic. I'm leaving that in. I don't care. Jeffrey Schlupp has also gone out on loan to Celtic, who are in the Champions League still. So maybe that's where I was getting confused there. But, you know, overall, I'd say Palace have done all right. You know, the fact that they've kept their main core group of players together, and they've brought in a couple players who can improve the team. I hesitate to give them a B. I think that's a bit strong. I mean, Chilwell's injured a lot, and I can't expect Esse to do too much despite his amazing debut. I'm going to give them a C. They've done all right of Palace, and they'll survive this season. They were threatened with relegation early on in the season, but credit to the Palace board. They've kept with Oliver Glasner as manager, someone who I think will really succeed down in Croydon. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. Given the financial constraints at Everton, it's not a huge surprise they didn't do too much business during this window. Just one loan in and one loan out. That loan out was Harrison Armstrong, who's gone to Derby County in the Championship for the rest of the season. And on the ins, a very exciting midfielder from Flamengo over in Brazil. It is Carlos Alcaraz, someone who could make a real difference to Everton's squad. I feel like that's a very good signing for them. Someone who might take a little bit of time to adapt, but a bit of depth if nothing else. So I'm excited to see how he does in the Northwest. Now, in terms of Everton overall, I mean, obviously they are doing quite well now. They were really threatening with relegation. The biggest signing for them this season, without a doubt, is David Moyes, who has done an incredible job since he's come to Everton. You know, fantastic for him, really. They have exited the FA Cup in the previous round, but they won't really care about that. Of course they want, of course, like any fan base does, but the main thing is for them is to survive, make it through to that new stadium in the Premier League next season, and I think firmly they will do that. They've shown they didn't really need to make too many signings as well. A lot of players that were underperforming under Sean Dyche because of the system. Dominic Calvert-Lewin scored a few goals before he got injured again. Iliman Ndiaye as well. Even Beto, I forgot that man existed. But he's popped up with some goals as well for Everton recently. So I think to be honest, the main thing for Everton is making the most of the players they've got already, because clearly there is talent in that squad. It's just they needed to be utilised properly, and unfortunately they were not utilised under Sean Dyche properly, and David Moyes is getting the best out of them. So in terms of the transfer business, I'll give them a C. It's been average. They brought one player in who can make them better. They've not lost any significant players either. So for me, that's a win. That's a pass mark. I give Everton a C overall. Fulham had a very quiet transfer window up until right at the very end of the window. Actually, technically, it was after the window actually closed. The only business they did was in the form of Seth Chingwaro joining from Manchester City. I imagine he's a youth player, doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. That's how young and unheard of he is relatively. But someone who is not young and not unheard of is Willian. Willian came out of nowhere. The man is back at Fulham. What on earth is going on there? Just literally at the end of the window, literally before, about an hour or two before it slammed shut, they were saying that Willian had arrived at Craven Cottage. He was going to re-sign for the Cottagers. Of course, Willian has played for the likes of Chelsea and Arsenal already in London, as well as Fulham, of course, as recently as last season. He's not been gone for that long. Of course, he did have a short stint over at Olympiacos over in Greece, but he's joined as a free agent. It's a relatively it's a free hit really for Fulham. I mean, I know they'll have to pay his wages, but even for Willian, I don't think he'd have come for too much. He's 36 years of age, so relatively old, of course, but someone with experience there at the end of the day to help out that squad. Fulham on the whole, in my opinion, having a very understated season. They could make a bid for Europe, perhaps, depending on how the cards fall really on that. But yeah, fantastic for Fulham, really. I am so happy that they got Willian back like that. Just such a random signing. You've got to love these things in football at the end of the day. In terms of the business overall, they've not lost any of the major players, which is a big thing. And I'm going to say that for a lot of these clubs in the Premier League. But it's true. If you don't lose your players, then you've not lost. I'm self-explanatory, but at the end of the day, you do want to strengthen, but sometimes maintaining and keeping what you have, especially from a financial point of view, is the right thing to do. It is a lot better to do, unless of course you're trying to allegedly circumvent FFP, PSR. I'm not saying Fulham are doing that, but the clubs that are more likely to do that, of course. I'm wearing the shirt of one for a start, for that matter, from the FA front anyway. They find all kinds of way to get around that through Barcelona, but yeah, Fulham on the whole, I mean, you got to give them a C. You can't say it's been disappointing. You can't say that they're not having a good season, and the fact that they've brought somebody in the form of Willian, that's at least something. They've not lost anybody. Nobody has left Fulham during this window. So yeah, on to the next one. Out of the three newly promoted sides, I said that Ipswich Town were the most likely to stay up, really, especially given the points deduction that Leicester City could have endured this season, but they've managed to avoid it. Now, out of the three promoted clubs as well, I would say that Ipswich Town have definitely had the best transfer window in the winter. They've given themselves at least a somewhat of a hope of staying up this season. I think it's going to be a massive ask for them, of course, but they have at least given it a go financially in terms of spending some money to try and stay in the league, because clearly their team is not really good enough at the moment. They've not lost anybody significant on the outs. They've transferred out George Edmondson to Middlesbrough for £640,000, and also Harry Clark has gone on loan to another Championship side, Sheffield United, for the rest of the season. They've not lost anybody significant there at all, really. Jayden Philogene has joined Ipswich Town from Aston Villa. Now, of course, Town were in for Philogene during the summer, but he's now joined them for around £20.5 million from Villa, which is around the fee I think they were trying to get him for anyway in the summer. So he's someone who can really improve their squad. Alex Palmer's coming from West Brom, their goalkeeper, for around £3 million. That's a relatively cheap and cheerful one. Somto Boniface and Julio Enciso have both come in as well. Enciso on a loan from Brighton and Boniface from Chelsea. I don't know if this is going to be enough for them to stay in the league. I hope it is. I want someone to stay up, to give us Championship sides some hope of getting promoted to the Premier League and staying there. But really, I don't know if this is going to be enough for them. But given how much they spent in the summer, and given how much, the fact that they actually have gone out and tried and spent money and given it a go, I'm going to give Ipswich Town a B for this window, really. It's, it could have been better. They could have maybe done something else, but realistically, I think this is probably the most realistic scenario for them. They're giving some money out, spending some money, but nothing too crazy. So overall, for me, it's giving them more of a chance of staying up, but I don't know if it's going to turn the tide for them. I hope it does, but I don't know if it will. But yeah, I'm going to give the Tractor Boys a B for their transfer business during this window. Given the financial constraints that Leicester City are under, it's not really a huge surprise they didn't do too much business during the winter transfer window. Wayo Koulibaly has joined from Parma for £3 million. That is a relatively cheap and cheerful deal for the Foxes, and that's the only transfer in they've had this entire window. In terms of the outs, it was Tom Cannon who left for around £10 million to Championship side Sheffield United. I don't think that's a bad bit of business for them. He was previously on loan at Stoke City in the Championship, so it's good to get some money in to help the post situation at Leicester City. Will Alves has also gone out. He's gone on loan to Cardiff City for the remainder of the season. I mean, it's disappointing for Leicester. I'd say they get a D grade for this because they've not strengthened really. I mean, Wuyuk is not going to keep them in the Premier League. With the greatest respect to the guy, I'm sure he's a decent player, but that's not going to be enough for them. So I think they're still going to get relegated, to be honest, with the way things are going. I don't think the transfer window's been that kind to them. They've not lost too much talent. I mean, Tom Cannon wasn't playing anyway. Will Alves was not playing anyway. So yeah, they've not strengthened. They've not given themselves much of a hope really when it comes to staying up, in my opinion, with this. So for me, it has to go down as a disappointment, but it's not a surprise given the financial constraints at the club, like I said either. So yeah, Leicester City get a D grade overall from me. Aside from some youth players going out on loan and some being released from their contracts, Liverpool did absolutely nothing during the winter transfer window. You know, and some people might see that as a negative, of course, but for me, you know, they did a similar thing in the summer. They only brought in Chiesa. He was the one player that came in, and I don't think Chiesa is a bad player really, despite not playing too much in terms of his playing time because of all the injuries. He's someone who is very talented, of course, but he just needs to get fit and be consistent, and he seems to be showing some signs of that at the moment, of course, too. But yeah, absolutely nothing from Liverpool whatsoever. And you know, before yesterday, I'd have said, well, you know, they're in contention for 4 cups, 4 trophies. They're doing magnificently. They're still doing magnificently, and they're still in contention for 3 cups, of course. But of course, they just exited the FA Cup at the weekend to Plymouth Argyle, which was one of the biggest shocks in recent times, really. You know, Liverpool absolutely all-conquering in the Premier League and the Champions League and into the final of the EFL Cup, but they don't make it past the 4th round of the FA Cup. So that might say that they need to strengthen, but to be honest with you, the team they put out was still pretty strong. They really should have beat Plymouth. Plymouth did an incredible job. Their goalkeeper pulling off some absolute worldly saves at times. So yeah, I mean, you can't give it anything other than a C, because it's like, well, they've not lost anybody, they've not brought anybody in, but they still probably have the best team in the Premier League. That's not really going to go changing, despite Manchester City's best efforts. We'll talk about them very soon. But yeah, I mean, it's just a difficult one to grade because they've done nothing relatively, but it is what it is. I can't say that that it's a surprise or that it's disappointing really for Liverpool. And if anything else, the fact that they've not spent anything puts them in next season in an incredibly strong financial position. They'll be able to do what Man City did during this window in the summer if they want to. They don't have to, of course, but they could do. So that's my thoughts on it, guys. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. Manchester City, the biggest spenders in the winter transfer window, probably in the world, definitely in England. I'd be shocked if anybody else spent more than them. Obviously, having a disappointing season in the Premier League this season so far, but you know, they are very much doing everything they can to try and reclaim the former glory. They've brought in a bunch of players. They've brought in 4 major players and also a relative youth signing as well in the form of Juma Bar, who was joined from Real Valladolid. I think he was on loan somewhere in like Sierra Leone or Liberia or something like that. Where they got this dude from, I don't know, but they found him and they've signed him for £5 million. So here's someone for the future very much, of course. But yeah, on the ins, we've got Omar Mouche coming in from Eintracht Frankfurt for over £60 million. Abudakir Kusanov, who was joined from Lon for around £34 million. Vitor Reis has joined from Palmeiras over in Brazil. And Nico Gonzalez for a nice around £50 million from FC Porto. It's not really translated to better results on the pitch just yet. They do come up against a very dangerous side in the form of Real Madrid as well, coming up this week in the Champions League. So that'll really show there in terms of who they can actually put onto the pitch. But yeah, they've absolutely signed everybody when it comes to that. You can't knock the fact that they've signed so many players like that. In terms of their outs, they've not lost anybody too major. Barr has gone out on loan to Lon over in France. Jacob Wright's gone on loan to Norwich City in the Championship. And also Josh Wilson Esbrand has gone on loan to another Championship side, Stoke City. The most major loss for them is Kyle Walker has gone on loan to AC Milan, but he'd very much fallen out of favour, maybe with Pep, but definitely with the board anyway. They wanted to sell him in the summer, but they didn't do so. Kyle Walker going out to play for the Rossoneri over in Italy. So happy he's getting to do that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of their ins, you can't criticise them in terms of how much money they spent. They had the money to spend. They didn't spend much in the summer window at all, and here they are splashing the cash to try and get a top 4 finish in the Premier League, try and get into the Champions League for next season, and try and salvage their season, really. Maybe go on a cup run. You know, they've Arsenal and Liverpool both out of the FA Cup now. Man City, I would say, are firmly favourites for that competition. But yeah, we'll see how it goes from with that. But in terms of their actual commitment with it, I've got to give them an A+. They got to get an A star. They've had the best transfer window for me. It's not quite bearing fruit yet, but I'm sure it will do in time. Maybe not this season even, but in the future. These are some really exciting young players that they have brought in that could be a success for Manchester City for the next 10-15 years or so in some of their cases. But yeah, there we go, guys. For me, Man City probably had the best transfer window of them all in the Premier League. Now, Manchester United, a very amazing transfer window for Manchester City, their noisy neighbours, but for Man United it was not quite as good, really, if I'm being honest. Aiden Heaven has come in from Arsenal, and he could be a bit of a backup player. He's on the bench for a cup. I don't see him really being a first team starter unless they absolutely have to. A bit of cover, really, that's all he's going to be there. Patrick Guehi, someone who came into the side immediately at the weekend against Leicester City in the FA Cup. Only played the first half, of course, but he's got to get used to the system, of course, used to Ruben Amorim as well. I think the most significant thing for them, though, is the outs there. They've managed to get rid of Anthony and Marcus Rashford, both on loan. But you have to look at United's side and think, wait a minute, they've got rid of 2 forward players. All right, 2 forward players that are really struggling, but they got rid of 2 forward players, and they've brought in nobody in that area. An area they are pretty light in, to be honest. I mean, they've had injuries up there too. So for me, this is one of the worst transfer windows out of the lot. I know they're restricted with PSR and all that sort of stuff, and Dorgu is a decent signing. I mean, it's not been a failure. I'm not going to give them an F, but I'm going to give them an E. I'm going to give them an E, the lowest grade I've done so far in terms of the alphabetical order of this. But you can't say it's been a good window. Man United fans have got their heads in their hands at this one, really, when it comes to how badly they've done. So yeah, I would very much just want to move on. Just get to the end of the season, get into a new accounting period with PSR, and get some new signings in, because right now they're just kind of having to endure the storm. But hey, they're still in the FA Cup, still in the Europa League. Imagine if they win a trophy this season. That would be incredible. Arsenal not winning a trophy, probably, and Man United win a trophy despite another terrible season for them in the Premier League. That would be very typical. It really would be. But yeah, Man United for me, very disappointing. They're getting an A. Not too much unlike Chelsea. Newcastle United, I think, are having to circumvent some good old PSR with their transfers during this window. They brought in absolutely nobody. Nobody was brought in at all during this transfer window, and there were some significant players that left on the outs. But in terms of the actual finances of these deals, I don't think they're bad deals at all, really. Miguel Almiron has returned to Atlanta United for £8.5 million. He was someone who featured every now and again, but not too regularly. So it's not a bad deal to cash in on him. Isaac Hayden has gone on loan to Portsmouth in the Championship. Not really much of our transfer was that, but I think one to try and circumvent those regulations is probably Lloyd Kelly. Now, he has gone on loan to Juventus over in Italy, and there is an obligation to buy in the summer for £20 million, which I don't think is a terrible deal for him. I thought he might have been... They could have maybe got a bit more, but I think Newcastle are desperate, to be honest. They've let him go to the Bianconeri for that kind of price. I think they are a bit desperate. They needed to get somebody out to get above the dotted line, as it were, when it came to, of course, the accounting and everything like that. So it's disappointing. I'm going to give Newcastle a D, just because it's disappointing. I mean, Front's not so bad, the fact they've let him go. You know, he's getting on a bit and he wasn't playing that much. But Kelly is someone who really could have been a star for the club, in my opinion. You know, he's someone, I believe he's a local lad. I'm sure he came from their academy anyway. So he's booked on pure profit, and that's why he's gone, unfortunately. That's why they've chosen him for that. But it's not terrible. They're going to get 20 million from him, and, you know, that serves a purpose financially for them. It's disappointing, of course, but it's not a massive surprise. But they've exited the transfer window with a weaker squad than what they came in with it. So for me, that has to be a disappointment, really. But Newcastle are having a great season, and I do back them to at least put up a very good fight against Liverpool in the final of the EFL Cup. You know, going down to Wembley again for a cup final is fantastic for the Geordie Boys. And on top of that as well, in the Premier League, they could well make it back to Champions League football, especially if there are 5 Champions League spots in the league this season, which I think there probably will be, given how the sides are going in Europe. But still a long way to go on that front. So yeah, for me, Newcastle, I mean, maybe a D+. You know, if I was to give it a mark within the mark, I would give it a D+ probably, because it's, you know, it's not a disaster for them, but it is disappointing, I would say. The Tricky Trees were suspiciously quiet during this transfer window. They didn't really do too much business at all, just 3 deals in total. 2 on the outs. James Ward-Prowse has returned to West Ham United after his loan was mutually agreed to be terminated, and Emmanuel Dennis has gone out on loan to Blackburn Rovers in the Championship. On the ins, Tyler Binder has come in on an undisclosed fee from Reading, but of course doesn't actually join the squad. He does go back on loan to the League One side for the remainder of the campaign. Again, Forest, of course, we know have fallen foul of PSR regulations in the past, so they don't want to be falling foul of that again, especially as they might well have a European campaign next season. I hope they do. They look like they're going to, and they could well be in the Champions League, which is just, I never thought that'd be possible. Hey, if Leicester City can do it, so can Forest. They're relatively local rivals there. So yeah, I would say overall you got to probably give Forest a C, because their squad is so strong. They signed so many players over this last couple of years or so. You know, there's barely anybody left from their time in the Championship, from winning that playoff final. I think that Yates is the only player that's left something. I'm sure I heard that, or one of the very few anyway. So overall, it's been all right. They've not lost any major players. They were Tottenham getting someone like Cunha in from Wolves. It didn't quite happen in the end. So yeah, I feel like they're still in a strong position to get through and get into Europe next season. Probably get into the Champions League. I'm saying probably now, which is just, again, I didn't think I'd ever be saying that, but there you go. So yeah, Nottingham Forest, flattering to deceive a little with some of those rumours, but at the end of the day, not a bad transfer window for them. A C overall. Southampton have been the whipping boys in the Premier League this season. They've had an absolutely awful campaign, but have they given them some sort of hope, really, when it comes to surviving in the Premier League this season? No, I wouldn't say they have, really. They've signed some players. Wellington's come in as a free agent. Joachim Sandra has come in from Valenciennes over in France for £4 million, and Albert Grombach has come in on loan from Rennes for the rest of the season. They've apparently signed a player called Victor Udo as well, who's a Nigerian striker who never scored for Royal Antwerp over in Belgium, which, I don't know, that doesn't exactly scream quality to me, really. They need quality to stay in the Premier League, but they don't have it, and they didn't get it during this window either. They've loaned out Ronnie Edwards, Gavin Bazunu, and also on top of that to Ben Brereton Diaz to Sheffield United as well. So really, they have exited the window ever so slightly stronger than what they came in. So I have to give them a C, because I can't say they've got worse. You know, to give them a D, I think it's unfair. But you can't say they've done better than that. I wouldn't say they are markedly stronger than what they were. They just have more players. Are these players better than what they already had? Probably not, or not significantly enough to make a difference. So yeah, I don't really give them any hope, to be honest. Southampton is still going down and going down for whimper, in my opinion. But we'll see how it goes for them in the remainder of the season. But I don't see these players really making a significant difference for them. Surprisingly, Tottenham didn't have that bad of a transfer window. For the longest time, it looked like they're going to do absolutely nothing. But they've made some decent signings, in my opinion. Antonin Kinski has come in as a goalkeeper. I mean, he's meant to be the backup goalkeeper, but he's become the first choice goalkeeper, while the main guy is, of course, out of the squad. And he's done a decent job, in my opinion. He's not been bad at all, really. £14 million coming in from Slavia Prague, the Czech international. Yang Min Hyuk as well has come in now. He was signed during the summer, but he has actually been transferred to Tottenham properly now. He was out on loan initially to Gangwon back in South Korea. So again, you know, a young player for the future that is being thrust into the limelight right now because Tottenham don't have any options really. Kevin Danso as well. He was meant to go to Wolverhampton Wanderers, I believe, but Tottenham very much scuppered and gazumped that deal by instead bringing him in on loan. I think there's an obligation to buy for 20 million, 25 million, something like that. So not a bad deal at all. And Matthijs Tel as well. That's a great signing in my opinion because at the end of the day, he was going to go to Manchester United. He was desperate to go to Man United, but the deal couldn't be done because of the finances. Tottenham Hotspur did have the finances though, and he's come in and looks okay so far in the games that I've seen him. Not amazing, but at the end of the day, you know, still featuring. I think he scored actually against Aston Villa in the FA Cup at the weekend, although Tottenham did of course head out. So yeah, for me, I mean, they've definitely done pretty well. I hesitate to give them an A. I feel that's a bit strong because thinking about it, Kinski in a full starting 11 when everybody's fit, if that ever happens again for Tottenham, Kinski won't start. Hyok obviously, well, he's actually gone on loan to QPR for the remainder of this season. Danso maybe would start, maybe in and around there anyway. Tel would probably start, so they're better. The better. If I could go to subgrades, I would probably go with a B+ for this, but I'm going to go with a B overall. Borderline, I think they've had a very good window of Tottenham. They've not lost anybody significant, and they've brought some players in. I don't think it's enough for them to get into the top 4. I mean, they are miles off it at the moment, of course, but the points gap is not huge at the same time. I don't feel like this is enough to get them back into the top 4. If they're going to get back to even European qualification of any kind for next season, they'd have to either win the Europa League, or on top of that, they'd either have to get a lot of players back in form quickly, because right now this squad simply isn't good enough because it's injured. There's so many people on the injury table. So those are my thoughts. Good window for Tottenham, but probably not going to be enough to end up where they want to be. Another club that was relatively quiet during this transfer window was West Ham United. Now, they have brought a couple players in. James Ward-Prowse has returned to the club after being loaned out to Nottingham Forest. He can resurrect his career, really, because he was doing so well at Southampton, at West Ham, and then just kind of just disappeared, really. Was not very much favoured by the previous manager of the club. With Graham Potter now in, though, things could very much change from the Lopetegui days. And Evan Ferguson as well, he is someone that he knows, I believe, from his time at Brighton. So that could be someone that could be a very shrewd signing for the Hammers. He's come on loan from the Seagulls for the remainder of the season. On the outs, Maxwell Cornet went on loan to Genoa over in Italy. So a quiet window for West Ham. But I do honestly think those two signings will very much benefit them. And they've not lost anybody major too. So let's give them a B. Let's give them a B. It's been a pretty good one for the Hammers in my opinion. I'll be very interested to see how Ferguson in particular gets on at West Ham. I hope he can resurrect his career. He's been injured for a long time, out of favour at Brighton, but someone who can make a real difference in my opinion to the Hammers. So pretty good overall, a B grade. Wolves are a side who have sprint pretty decently, to be fair, during this transfer window. They've brought in a couple players. Emmanuel Agbadu. They have to do that song. They have to. He's coming from Reims for 17 million pounds. Not spent 70. That'd be a terrible sign. 17 million pounds from the French side. Nassa I don't know how you say that last name. I'm not going to try and say it. That's a bit too risky. I'm going to give that a go. He's coming from Red Star Belgrade for an undisclosed fee. He's a defender. Marshall Monetti as well as coming from Reims too for an undisclosed fee. So yeah, the Wolves are raiding Reims during this transfer window. On the outs, Luke Bull has headed off to Millwall for £1 million, just over that. So yeah, I mean, for me, Wolves, they've strengthened a little bit. They've not lost any of their major players. Matheus Cunha was very much linked with a number of clubs. Chelsea, Arsenal, Man United, all the usual suspects. Nottingham Forest as well were also apparently in. Didn't happen in the end for him. So they've kept him. They've strengthened a little bit. And I think overall, probably going to be okay. If any of the sides that are going to go down that are not in the relegation places right now, I would say it'd be Wolves. They are looking like a bit dodgy, to be honest with you, at times, but I think they've just got enough. I think they've got just enough. Ipswich have strengthened and they'll be their biggest threat, but we'll see how things get on there. But yeah, I'd say Wolves overall probably a B. I'd say they've strengthened a little bit. They've not lost anybody major, so I think it's been a decent window for the Wanderers. But yeah, There we go, guys. Thank you for joining us on this rundown of all the January transfer window business for the Premier League and how all of their clubs did. Do you agree with my grades for your club? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below as always. And we'll see you very soon for some more content here on thefootballchronicle.com, guys. And of course, things like reviews and stuff like that. I love doing these longer form reviews for you guys. I'll probably do one at the end of the season going over how everybody's performed in the Premier League and how, right or wrong, all my predictions for the top 5 divisions of English football were as well, because at the moment they're not looking good. We did a mid-season review of all those. Very few of them are looking good, the Premier League included, of course. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. So yeah, see you soon, guys. Have a good one. If you want to see more content like this from thefootballchronicle.com, like, share, comment, subscribe as always. See you soon.